Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to go back to basics and talk about something which I kind of assumed that most people, or at least most fairly experienced knitters, would know, but I have noticed when I teach workshops that quite a lot of people don't really know about this. So I've been teaching workshops now for 15, 16 years, maybe a bit longer, I'm not sure. And this is something that I've noticed that a lot of knitters find it a little bit difficult. So what we're going to do is look at how to unpick stitches. It might sound quite basic, but I've noticed in my workshops that when people unpick, they quite often end up with twisted stitches. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to unpick stocking stitch without ending up with twisted stitches. If you are new to my channel, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. One thing I realised over years of teaching is that when people unpick, they quite often make it a little bit more difficult for themselves than they really need to. So let's look at unpicking. So I'm just going to do a plain stocking stitch. I do have some videos, I think, YouTube tutorials on how to unpick lace. So I will link some of those below. It's also, there's a lot of unpicking lace in my Successful Lace Knitting online course, and there will be some tutorials or videos on unpicking brioche in my brioche online course. When this video is live on YouTube, the brioche online course is not ready yet, but it will be out very soon after this video is on YouTube. So if you're watching this when this video first comes out and you're interested in the online brioche course, then make sure you sign up to my newsletter. The link is below. And if you're watching this in the future, then if you go to my website, you will find my online brioche course. There is a link below this video to the course page where all my online courses are listed. One thing I see when people unpick is that they end up with their stitches twisted, and then when they start knitting again, they have to either knit or pull through the back loop, which isn't too much of a problem unless you've got like a lot of stitches, then it might just slow you down a bit. But it is a problem if you are doing lace knitting, because then you can't always just work them through the back of the loop. You have to quite often untwist them and put them back on your needles the correct way. So I'm talking now if you knit Western styles, either continental or English style knitting. I think maybe also Portuguese knitting, but I can't remember because it's a while since I've done it. But some knitting styles, like combined knitting, you end up with your stitches sitting the wrong way around. So if you knit English or continental style, normally your stitches will be sitting that way on your needle. So front leg will be in the front of the needle and the back leg will be at the back. Does that make sense? Like that. So your stitch will go from the front across to the back. With some Eastern styles of knitting, like combined knitting, your stitches will actually sit the opposite way. So they will go from back to the front. Which is what we would call twisted in Western knitting. So if that confused you, don't worry about it. If you normally just knit through the front loop, then you are knitting Western style. If you're normally knitting through the back loop, then you're knitting Eastern style. So I'm going to unpick this row. Now it doesn't matter whether you unpick from left or right. You can unpick either way. We have preferences. I tend to prefer to unpick with the right side facing me, especially if I'm unpicking something that's not stocking stitch. If I make a mistake on a knit row and I realize I have to unpick back, I will just unpick back. If I'm on a purl row, I will just unpick back. If I'm I am doing any kind of patterning, like lace patterns and things, I tend to do it on the right side because I can see better what I'm doing. So let's talk about what I mean. So if I'm going to go from left to right, and then we'll go from right to left later. So I'm going to pick this row and I'm going to go from left to right. I'm going to hold my yarn continental style because that's how I knit, but it doesn't matter if you hold it English style, but I am much slower doing it English style. So I'm going to stick with continental. You can do it English style. It doesn't affect the main technique. So if you go into the first stitch from front to back, so if I'm picking from left to right, if I go into the stitch from front to back and take it off, that still will sit the correct way on the needle. It's the last stitch or the first stitch, whichever way you look at it. So it's not quite so obvious. We'll do the next one. So if I go in from front to back and take it off, then the stitch will sit the correct way on my needle, so that when I come to knit it again, I can just knit it as normal. If I go in from back to front, when I go from left to right, then the stitch will be twisted, so the leading leg will now be at the back of my needle, which means that when I knit that stitch again, I have to knit it through the back loop. So when you're going from left to right, if you want the stitches to sit on your needle so that the leading leg, the bit you knit into, is at the front of your needle, then you need to put your needle in from left to right. Another thing I've seen is that sometimes people are a little bit unsure where to put their needle in, and they will sometimes let it off and then put their needle in. That's fine, but you do risk it unraveling further down. So if you're not sure where to put your needle in, if you're maybe less experienced knitter and you haven't unpicked much yet, or nobody's shown you this yet, if you're an experienced knitter, you probably already know this, but if you're a newer knitter, you may not. So if I go in from front to back, I basically, if I pull the needles apart a bit, if I go into that hole below my needle, so in there, and let it go off, in there and let it off. I also find it easier to do this if I keep my working yarn taut. So if I get to the point where I'm unpick quite a lot of stitches and my working yarn becomes a bit lax like that, I've seen some people who just wrap it around their finger. I can't do that very quickly, so I just let go and pick it up again. Same thing if you knit English style. If you find it difficult to unpick, try and tighten that yarn, because I do think that makes it easier. It just kind of opens up the stitch a bit, and if you pull your needles apart as well, you can see the stitch you're going into much easier. So if you're going from left to right, you go into the front of the stitch. Now let's turn over and go from right to left. So we're now on the purl side on this particular fabric, and I'm going from right to left. Now I'll do this with the yarn at the front. If you knit English style, you would have the yarn at the front because we're on the purl side. If you knit continental purl, you'd probably have the yarn at the front because you purl with the yarn at the front. If you purl Norwegian style, you normally purl with the yarn at the back. You can unpick it with the yarn at the back, but you can also take the yarn to the front to unpick. It doesn't really matter as long as you know where to put the needle in. So now, because we're going from right to left, if I go in from front to back, my stitch will end up sitting twisted on my needle, so the leading leg will be at the back. So then we have to untwist it. If I go in from back to front, then when I take that stitch off, the stitch sits correctly on my needle, so the leading leg is at the front. So back to front, back to front. So when you go from left to right, you go in through the front. When you go from right to left, you go in through the back. If you're unsure and you can't remember, put your needle in and look, take it off and look, and you take it off and you think, oh no, that's twisted. Now I went in from the front. So the next time you just go in from the back. Right, let's do the last stitch. I actually slipped my edge stitches, so I didn't want to unpick that last one. You don't necessarily need to remember whether you need to go from front to back or back to front, but just learn to look at your needle, and if you can see that your stitch is twisted, then think, okay, I went in from the back there. If I go in through the front, will it look different? And let's try it, and then you will quickly learn to remember, to recognize what's what. And it'll just save you a bit of time when you start knitting again, and because your stitches will sit the correct way on your needle, and you won't have to worry about untwisting them or knitting them through the back loop or anything like that. And you also won't risk forgetting to do that and then accidentally knitting or pulling them twisted, because if you're doing stocking stitch and you're knitting the stitches twisted, or pulling them twisted, that will make your stocking stitch look a bit strange. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, please ask them below. You can follow all the links to my social media and how to sign up to my newsletter and my online courses below this video. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.